The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the famous theater building where America's biggest talent show held its auditions. Inside the busy production office, Katie Williams sat at her desk with a steaming cup of coffee, looking through a thick stack of audition forms. She'd been working as a producer for the show for 8 years, and she thought she had seen every type of performer imaginable. Katie flipped through the pages quickly. There was a 22-year-old dancer from Texas, a singing group of teenagers from New York, and a man who claimed he could juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle. She had seen it all before, then she stopped at one particular form and read it twice. The name was Helen Tanaka, age 98 years old, from Sacramento, California. Under the section that asked about her performance background, she had written simply, none. In the space for special notes, there were just a few words, Hiroshima survivor. This is my story. Katie stared at the form for a long moment. In all her years working on the show, she had never received an audition request from someone so old. Most contestants were young people hoping to become famous. This was something completely different. She walked across the hall to the office of her assistant, Danny Rodriguez. Danny was busy organizing the day's schedule on his computer. Danny, look at this, Katie said, placing the form on his desk. What do you think? Danny adjusted his glasses and read the form carefully. His eyebrows raised when he saw the age. 98? Are you sure this isn't a mistake? I called her grandson yesterday to confirm, Katie replied. He said she's completely serious about this. She wants to audition. What kind of act does a 98-year-old woman do? Danny asked. That's what I want to find out, Katie said. I'm putting her on today's list. Meanwhile, in the theater's main auditorium, the 3 judges were getting ready for another day of auditions. Paul Martinez, a famous singer with silver hair and kind eyes, was reviewing his notes from the previous day. He had been a judge on the show for 5 seasons and loved discovering new talent. At the table next to him, Lisa Brooks was checking her phone. She was a popular comedian known for her quick wit and warm personality. She enjoyed the audition days because she never knew what surprises would walk onto the stage. The 3rd judge, Frank Coleman, was stretching his legs near the stage. He was a Broadway legend who had been performing for over 40 years. He had seen thousands of performers in his career, but he still got excited about finding someone truly special.
Ow. Good morning, everyone,
Called Amanda Rogers, the show's host, as she walked onto the stage. She was wearing a bright blue dress and her usual cheerful smile. Are you ready for another day of amazing auditions? Always ready, Paul replied with a grin. I hope we see something memorable today, Frank added. They had no idea how memorable this day would become. Outside the theater, an old yellow taxi pulled up to the curb. The driver got out and carefully helped an elderly Japanese-American woman step onto the sidewalk. She moved slowly but steadily, carrying a worn leather bag close to her chest. Thank you very much, Helen, Tanaka said to the driver in a soft voice. From the other side of the taxi emerged a man in his 30s with dark hair and gentle features. This was Ben Tanaka, Helen's grandson. He had driven with her from Sacramento to Los Angeles for this audition. Grandma, are you sure you want to do this? Ben asked, taking her arm gently. It's not too late to change your mind. Helen looked up at the tall theater building with its bright signs and busy entrance. People were walking in and out constantly. Most of them were much younger than her, carrying guitars, dance bags, and other performance equipment. I have waited 77 years to tell this story, Helen said quietly. I am not changing my mind now. Ben nodded. He had been trying to convince his grandmother to share her experiences for years, but she had always refused. Then 3 months ago, something changed. She had seen the talent show on television and suddenly announced that she wanted to audition. They walked slowly toward the entrance. Helen's small frame looked even tinier next to the grand theater doors. She wore a simple navy blue dress and comfortable shoes. Her gray hair was neatly arranged, and despite her age, her dark eyes were bright and alert. Inside the theater lobby, the scene was chaotic. Hundreds of hopeful performers filled the space, practicing their acts, warming up their voices, and nervously waiting for their turn. The noise level was overwhelming. A young woman with pink hair was doing vocal exercises in one corner, Near the registration desk, a group of dancers was stretching and rehearsing their routine. A man with a guitar was quietly strumming and humming to himself. When Helen and Ben approached the registration table, the young woman behind it looked surprised. "Hi there," she said brightly. "Are you here to pick up someone after their audition?" "No," Helen replied politely. "I am here to audition." The registration woman blinked and looked at her computer screen. She scrolled through the list of names until she found it. "Oh," she said, clearly surprised. "Yes, here you are. Helen Tanaka, you're scheduled for this afternoon." She handed Helen a number tag and an information packet. "You can wait in the main holding area with the other contestants." As Helen and Ben made their way to the waiting area, conversations around them seemed to pause. Other contestants glanced curiously at the elderly woman walking among them. Some whispered to each other, wondering what her act could possibly be. Helen found a quiet chair near the back of the room and sat down carefully. She placed her leather bag on her lap and folded her hands over it. Ben sat beside her, still looking concerned. "What if they don't understand?" he whispered to her. Helen was quiet for a moment, watching all the young performers around them practicing and preparing. "Understanding is not something you can force," she finally said. "You can only offer your truth and hope that people are ready to receive it." The afternoon sun was beginning to shine through the theater windows when Helen's number was finally called. The moment she had been preparing for her entire life was about to begin. Helen stood up slowly when her number was called. The leather bag felt heavier in her hands now, but she held it firmly against her chest. Ben rose beside her and gently touched her shoulder. "I will be right here watching," he whispered. "Are going to be wonderful." Helen nodded and began walking toward the stage entrance. Her steps were small and careful, but she moved with quiet determination. The other contestants stopped their conversations and watched as the tiny elderly woman made her way past them. A production assistant met Helen at the side of the stage. The young man looked nervous as he checked his clipboard. "Mrs. Tanaka?" he asked. "Are you ready to go on?" "Yes, I am ready," Helen replied simply. The stage lights were bright and warm. Helen had never stood on a stage before, and for a moment she felt overwhelmed by the size of the theater. Hundreds of red seats stretched out in front of her, and she could see the three judges sitting at their table below. Amanda Rogers walked onto the stage with her microphone, smiling warmly at Helen. "Well, hello there," Amanda said in her friendly voice. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "My name is Helen Tanaka," Helen replied, speaking clearly into the microphone Amanda held toward her. "And how old are you, Helen?" "I am 98 years. Old, a murmur went through the audience. Even the judges looked surprised. Paul Martinez leaned forward in his chair, suddenly very interested. 98, Amanda repeated with amazement. "That's incredible. Where are you from?" "I live in Sacramento, California now," Helen said. "But I was born in Hiroshima, Japan." The theater became quieter. People in the audience began to pay closer attention. "Tell us a little about yourself, Helen," Amanda encouraged. Helen took a small breath. She had practiced these words many times, but saying them out loud to all these people felt different than she had imagined. "I came to America in 1966, Helen began. "I was a young woman then, 24 years old. I met my husband at a church in Los Angeles. We had 3 children together. He died 5 years ago." "I'm so sorry for your loss," Amanda said gently. "Thank you," Helen replied. "We had a good life together, very peaceful, very quiet." Judge Lisa Brooks spoke up from her seat. "Len, forgive me for asking, but what brings you here today? This is quite unusual for someone your age." Helen was quiet for a moment. She looked down at the leather bag in her hands, then back up at the judges. "I have never told my story before," she said. "Not the whole story, not even to my children or my grandchildren. But I am 98 years old now, and I think it is time."
What story is that?
Frank Coleman asked softly. Helen's voice became even quieter, but the theater was so silent that everyone could hear her clearly. "I was 7 years old on August 6th, 1945, she said. "I was in Hiroshima that day." The audience held its breath. Everyone knew what happened in Hiroshima on that date. I was walking to school with my little brother, Helen continued. His name was Koji. He was 5 years old. We were about 10 minutes from our house when we saw the bright light in the sky. Helen paused. The memory was still so clear after all these years. The light was brighter than the sun, brighter than anything I had ever seen. Then came the sound and the wind. Everything was destroyed. Buildings, trees, people, everything. Paul Martinez had tears in his eyes. He had heard about the atomic bomb, but he had never met someone who lived through it. "What happened to you and your brother?" Amanda asked very gently. "We were thrown to the ground by the blast," Helen said. "When I woke up, Koji was not moving. I called his name, but he did not answer. I stayed with him until some people came to help. They took us to a place where they were helping injured people." Helen stopped talking for a moment. She had never spoken these words out loud before. "Koji died that afternoon," she continued. "My parents died too. Our house was gone. Almost everyone I knew was gone. The entire theater was completely silent. Even the judges were struggling to control their emotions." "Helen," Lisa Brooks said quietly, "I can't imagine how difficult this must be to talk about." "For 77 years, I have kept this story inside me," Helen replied. "When I came to America, I decided to never speak about it. I wanted to forget. I wanted to have a new life with no sadness." "But you couldn't forget," Amanda said with understanding. "No, I could not forget. Every year, on August 6th, I would remember. I would think about Koji and my parents and all the people who died, but I never talked about it, not even to my husband." Judge Frank Coleman leaned forward. "Helen, what changed your mind? Why are you telling us now?" Helen looked directly at him. 3 months ago, I was watching this show on television. I saw a young man singing a song about his father who died in a war. He was crying while he sang, but he was also smiling. I realized that sharing pain can also bring healing. "And you decided you wanted to share your story," Paul Martinez said. "Yes. I am 98 years old. I do not have much time left. I want people to know what happened. I want them to remember Koji and all the others who died. I also want them to know that life can continue after the worst things happen." Helen lifted the leather bag slightly. "I brought something that belonged to my father. It is the only thing that survived from our house. I have never played it for anyone before." "What is it?" Amanda asked. "It is a shakuhachi, a Japanese flute. My father taught me to play when I was very small. After he died, I kept it with me, but I never played it, until now." The judges looked at each other. They'd heard thousands of auditions, but nothing had ever prepared them for this moment. "Helen," Paul Martinez said, "we are honored that you chose to share your story with us. We would be very honored to hear you play." Helen smiled for the first time since she had taken the stage. It was a small, peaceful smile. "Thank you," she said. "This song is for Koji and for my parents and for everyone who did not get to live their full lives. But it is also for hope and for the beautiful life I was able to build in America." The theater waited in perfect silence as Helen carefully opened her leather bag. Helen reached into her leather bag with trembling hands. The theater was so quiet that people could hear the soft rustling of the old leather. She pulled out a wooden flute that looked ancient and well-worn. The wood was dark brown with age, and there were small scratches and marks on its surface. "The shakuhachi is over 100 years old," Helen said softly, holding the flute carefully. "My grandfather made it for my father when he was a young man. My father taught me to play it when I was 4 years old." She looked down at the instrument in her hands. "After the bomb, when I found it in the ruins of our house, I thought it was broken. But when I cleaned off the dust and ash, it still worked perfectly. It was like a miracle." Amanda Rogers stepped back to give Helen space on the stage. The judges sat completely still, waiting. Helen brought the flute to her lips and closed her eyes. For a moment, she was no longer a 98-year-old woman on a stage in front of hundreds of people. She was a little girl again, sitting next to her father in their small house in Hiroshima, learning to make music. The first note that came from the shakuhachi was soft and low. It seemed to float through the theater like a gentle wind. The sound was different from any instrument most people in the audience had ever heard. It was haunting and beautiful at the same time. Helen played slowly, each note clear and pure. The melody was simple but deeply moving. She had created this song many years ago in the quiet hours when she could not sleep, and the memories of that terrible day came back to her as she played. Something magical began to happen. The music seemed to tell a story without words. People in the audience could feel the sadness and loss, but they could also sense something else underneath: hope and strength. Judge Paul Martinez felt tears starting to run down his cheeks. He had been a professional musician for over 30 years, but he had never heard anything that touched his heart like this. The music was not just notes and rhythm, it was pure emotion. Helen opened her eyes and began to sing while she played. Her voice was soft and aged, but it carried perfectly through the theater. She sang first in Japanese words that few people in the audience understood, but everyone could feel their meaning. Gagi no koga kikoeru, she sang. I can hear Koji's voice. Kazi ni nat watashi ni hanush kakuru. He speaks to me on the wind. Her voice grew slightly stronger as she continued the song. She sang about that morning when she and her little brother walked to school together for the last time. She sang about his laugh and the way he always held her hand when they crossed the street. Then Helen switched to English. Her voice still gentle but filled with deep emotion. Little brother, where did you go that day? The light took you away from me, but your memory will always stay. The judges were crying openly now. Lisa Brooks had her hand over her mouth, trying to control her sobs. Frank Coleman sat perfectly still, but tears were streaming down his face. In the audience, people were completely silent. Some were crying. Others just stared at the small woman on the stage in amazement. Many had never thought much about what happened in Hiroshima so many years ago. But Helen's song made it real and personal. Helen continued singing, her voice growing stronger with each verse. I came across the ocean wide to find a place where I could hide. But you cannot hide from memories. They follow like the morning breeze. She sang about her journey to America, about meeting her husband, about building a new life while carrying the weight of her past. I learned to smile. I learned to love. I felt the blessing from above. But every August, every year, I feel you standing very near. The shakuhachi's haunting melody wove through her words like a prayer. Helen moved slowly as she played, her whole body connected to the music. Despite her age, she seemed to have incredible strength and grace. Now I am old. My hair is gray, but I remember every day. The children lost, the mother's tears, the silence that has lasted years. The theater was completely captivated. This was not just a performance. It was a testimony, a memorial, a gift of truth from someone who had lived through history. Helen's voice became stronger as she reached the heart of her song. But from the ashes, flowers grow, and that is something we must know. From pain can come the greatest love, like blessings sent from heaven above. She sang about her children and grandchildren, about the joy she found in her American life, about the peace that came with age and acceptance. I found my home across the sea, and there my heart learned to be free. Though sadness lives forever here, she touched her chest. Love is stronger than my fear. The song began to build toward its conclusion. Helen's voice, though aged, soared with surprising power. So I sing for those who cannot sing, for every lost and broken thing. May music heal what words cannot. May love repair what time forgot. As she played the final notes on the shakuhachi, Helen's voice became very soft again. Koji, dear brother, can you hear? Your sister's song across the years? I kept my promise, kept you near in every note, in every tear. The last note hung in the air for what seemed like forever. Helen slowly lowered the flute and stood quietly on the stage. She looked peaceful, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The theater remained completely silent for several long seconds. People seemed afraid to break the spell that Helen's music had created. Then slowly, one person in the audience began to clap. Others joined in, and within moments the entire theater was filled with applause. but it was not the usual excited clapping of a talent show audience. It was respectful, emotional applause, the kind reserved for something truly sacred. Paul Martinez stood up from the judges' table, still clapping and wiping tears from his eyes. Lisa Brooks and Frank Coleman followed, and soon the entire audience was on their feet. Helen stood quietly in the center of the stage, holding her father's flute. She looked small under the bright lights, but somehow she also looked incredibly strong. After 77 years of silence, she had finally shared her song with the world. The applause continued for several minutes. Helen simply waited, a peaceful smile on her face. She had done what she came to do. The applause slowly began to fade, but the theater remained filled with an electric feeling. Helen stood quietly on the stage, still holding her father's flute close to her chest. Her eyes were bright, and for the first time since she had taken the stage, she looked completely at peace. Amanda Rogers walked back onto the stage, wiping tears from her own eyes. She had hosted this show for 6 years and had seen thousands of performances, but nothing had ever affected her like this. Helen, Amanda said, her voice shaking slightly, "That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing something so personal." "With all of us, thank you for listening," Helen replied simply. The judges sat at their table, still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Paul Martinez was the first to speak. He stood up slowly, his hand resting on the table for support. "Helen," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "In my 40 years in the music business, I have heard every kind of song you can imagine. I have worked with some of the greatest artists in the world. What you just shared with us was not just music, it was truth. It was history. It was love." Helen nodded, listening carefully to his words. Paul continued. "You said this was your first time performing in public, but I want you to know that what you did here today was more powerful than anything I have ever heard on any stage, anywhere in the world." Lisa Brooks wiped her eyes and leaned forward. "Helen, I don't even know what to say. I feel like I just learned more about courage and strength in the last 10 minutes than I have in my entire life." "Thank you," Helen said quietly. "I was very scared to come here today, but my grandson told me that some stories need to be shared even when they are difficult." Frank Coleman, who had been silent since Helen's performance ended, finally spoke. "Helen, may I ask you something? In all these years, what made you keep that song inside? Why did you wait until now to share it?" Helena thought carefully before answering. "When I was young and came to America, I thought the best way to heal was to forget. I wanted to be a normal American wife and mother. I did not want people to see me as someone who had been through terrible things." She paused, looking down at the flute in her hands. "But as I got older, I realized that forgetting was not the same as healing. The memories were always there. The song was always there, waiting." "What changed?" Frank asked. "My husband died 5 years ago," Helen said. "After he was gone, I had a lot of quiet time to think. I realized that I had spent so many years trying to protect other people from my sadness that I never gave them the chance to understand my joy." "Your joy?" Amanda asked. Helen smiled. "Yes, the joy of survival. The joy of finding love after loss. It's the joy of watching my children grow up safe and happy in America. The joy of living long enough to see my grandchildren born. These are gifts that came from surviving the worst day of my life." Paul Martinez looked at his fellow judges. He could see the same thought in all their eyes. This was not just another audition. This was something special, something that needed to be recognized in a big way. Without speaking to the other judges first, Paul stood up and walked around the table toward the center of the stage. His eyes were focused on something behind Helen, the large golden buzzer that sat on a pedestal. "At the back of the judges' area," Paul said, his voice growing stronger. "I have been a judge on this show for 5 seasons. In all that time, I have only pressed the golden buzzer 3 times. Each time, it was for someone who did more than just entertain us. They shared something real, something important, something that changed everyone who heard it." Helen watched him curiously, not fully understanding what he was talking about. "The golden buzzer sends a performer straight to the live finals," Paul explained. "It means that what they did was so special that they don't have to audition again. They have already proven that they deserve to be on the biggest stage we have. He stopped walking and looked directly at Helen. What you shared with us today was not just a performance. It was a gift. You gave us your pain, your healing, your hope, and your love. You helped us understand something important about human strength and the power of music to connect us all. The audience began to understand what was happening. People started to lean forward in their seats, excitement building. Helen Tanaka, Paul said loudly enough for everyone to hear. You are 98 years old, and you have lived through things that most of us cannot even imagine. You survived tragedy, built a beautiful life, and today, you had the courage to share your story with the world. He placed his hand on the golden buzzer and looked back at Helen one more time. This is for you, for your brother Koji, for your parents, and for everyone who needs to know that hope can survive anything. Paul slammed his hand down on the golden buzzer. Immediately, the theater exploded with golden light and confetti. Sirens blared and music played loudly as thousands of pieces of golden paper fell from the ceiling like snow. The audience jumped to their feet again, cheering and clapping wildly. Helen stood in the center of it all, looking amazed. She had never seen anything like this before. Golden confetti was landing in her hair and on her dress, but she just stood there smiling, still holding her father's flute. Lisa Brooks and Frank Coleman ran onto the stage and embraced Helen gently. Paul joined them, and for a moment, all four of them stood together in the shower of golden confetti. You did it, Helen, Lisa shouted over the noise. You're going to the finals. Amanda Rogers was crying and laughing at the same time as she spoke into her microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Helen Tanaka is going straight to the live shows. In the wings of the theater, Ben Tanaka was sobbing with pride and joy. He had never seen his grandmother look so happy. After 77 years of carrying her story alone, she had finally shared it with the world, and the world had embraced her with open arms. The golden confetti continued to fall as Helen waved to the audience. She looked like a small golden angel standing in the spotlight, surrounded by love and acceptance. For the first time in her very long life, Helen felt completely free. 3 weeks after Helen's golden buzzer moment, the world had changed for the quiet woman from Sacramento. Her audition video had been watched over 50 million times on the internet. News stations from around the globe had called asking for interviews. Letters and emails poured in from people in dozens of countries, all wanting to thank Helen for sharing her story. Helen sat in her small living room, surrounded by boxes of mail that Ben had brought over from the post office. Picked up letter after letter, reading each one carefully. Many were from other survivors of terrible events, wars, natural disasters, and personal tragedies. They wrote to tell Helen that her courage had inspired them to speak about their own experiences. Grandmother Ben said, sitting down beside her with a cup of tea, "There's a letter here from a school in Japan. The students want to invite you to visit and share your story with them." Helen took the letter and read it slowly. It was written in both Japanese and English by a group of high school students from Hiroshima. They say that many young people in Japan today don't know much about what happened in 1945, Helen said quietly. They want to learn from someone who was there. Would you want to go? Ben asked. Helen was quiet for a long moment. I never thought I would return to Japan, but maybe it is time. The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. It was Katie Williams, the show's producer, calling about the live finals that were only 1 week away. Helen, we've had to move your performance to the biggest theater in Los Angeles, Katie explained. The demand for tickets has been incredible. Everyone wants to see you perform live. Helen felt nervous about performing in front of an even larger audience, but she also felt excited. The response to her story had shown her that people needed to hear these kinds of messages about hope, survival, and the power of love to overcome hatred. Meanwhile, schools across America, teachers were showing Helen's audition video to their students and talking about the history of World War II. Many young people had never heard a first-hand account of the atomic bombing before. Helen's song had made history feel real and personal to them. At Roosevelt High School in Chicago, 16-year-old students sat in complete silence as they watched Helen's performance on their classroom computer. Can you imagine living through? Something like that when you were only 7 years old, asked their teacher, Mrs. Patterson. And she still found a way to build a happy life, added Maria, one of the students. That's incredible. I want to write to her, said another student, named Kevin. I want to tell her that her story made me think differently about my own problems. Oh. Similar conversations were happening in classrooms around the world. Helen's story was teaching young people about resilience, forgiveness, and the importance of sharing difficult truths. The night of the live finals arrived quickly. The theater was packed with over 5,000 people. Celebrities, politicians, and ordinary families had all come to see Helen perform. In the front row sat a group of elderly men and women, other World War II survivors who had traveled from across the country to support Helen. Backstage, Helen sat quietly in her dressing room with Ben. She was wearing the same simple navy blue dress she had worn to her audition, and she held her father's shakuhachi flute in her lap. "Are you nervous, grandmother?" Ben asked. Little Helen admitted, "But mostly I feel grateful that people want to listen." Amanda Rogers knocked on the door. "Helen, it's almost time. Are you ready?" Helen stood up slowly and nodded. "I am ready." As she walked toward the stage entrance, Helen could hear the excited murmur of the huge audience. When Amanda introduced her, the crowd erupted in applause before she even appeared. "Ladies and gentlemen," Amanda announced, "please welcome the woman who has touched hearts around the world, Helen Tanaka." Helen walked onto the stage and was amazed by what she saw. The theater was much larger than the one where she had auditioned, and every seat was filled. But what surprised her most was that she was not alone on the stage. Behind her stood a choir of 30 children from a local school, all wearing white robes. "Helen," Amanda explained, "these children learned your song and wanted to sing with you tonight. Would that be all right?" Helen looked at the young faces behind her and smiled. They ranged in age from 8 to 15, some of them the same age she had been when her world changed forever. "That would be wonderful," Helen said. She began to play her shakuhachi, the same haunting melody that had moved millions of people around the world. But this time, as she sang her song about loss and hope, 30 young voices joined her in harmony. The children sang the English verses while Helen sang in Japanese. Clear, sweet voices blended with her aged but strong voice to create something magical. The song about one little girl's survival had become a song for all children, everywhere. Little brother, where did you go that day?" the children sang softly. "Koji no ko ga kikoeru," Helen sang in Japanese, her voice carrying across the theater. As the song continued, people in the audience began to cry. But these were not only tears of sadness, they were tears of beauty, of connection, of hope. When the performance ended, the theater was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, everyone stood up. The applause went on for over 10 minutes. Helen and the children held hands and bowed together. Although Helen did not win the competition that night, something more important had happened. Her story had traveled around the world, inspiring people to share their own difficult truths and to find hope in the darkest times. 6 months later, Helen did make that trip to Japan. She visited schools in Hiroshima and spoke to thousands of young people about peace, forgiveness, and the power of music to heal wounds. Back in her home in Sacramento, Helen's small living room was now filled with thank you letters from people whose lives had been changed by her courage. She had learned that sharing her pain had not only helped her heal, but it helped countless others find their own strength. At 98 years old, Helen Tanaka had finally found her voice, and the whole world was listening.